2013 until the 7th of October 2016.
You have made a statement. It is dated the 7th of December 2016. It is entitled Statement on the Inquiry by the Ad hoc Committee of the SABC Board members, and it is a 3-page statement. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
With your permission, can this statement be handed in as part and parcel of the evidence before this inquiry?
Yes, sir.
Chair, I request that the statement be accepted as evidence and marked Annexure B. In your statement, on page 1, the second paragraph, and I want to read it, the matter relating to the breakdown in the governance edifice within the South African Broadcasting Corporation predates my appointment to the SABC Board, but continued to escalate to even higher trajectory right up to the 5th of October. Can you unpack that statement for the committee?
Did you say for the court, sir?
Sorry?
Well, I thought you said I must unpack it for the court, so I was beginning to wonder whether we're in court.
Sorry, I mean, for the committee. I'm sorry if I said court, I'm referring to the committee.
Thank you. What I meant by my statement was that before I became a board member, I was quite aware about some of the dynamics that happened in the board prior to the one that I served on. I do recall that with the information that I was able to receive, particularly the governance review that was done by one of the audit companies, it was quite evident that what was happening in the previous board under the chairpersonship of Dr. Ngubane, seemingly there were quite a number of problems that were encountered. Amongst others, it was the relationship between board members and some of the board members with executive members or members of the executive committee. But most importantly, at the point at which I became a board member, it was quite evident also that some of the issues that were raised in the report were still affecting the current board. And there has always been what I call a common denominator throughout. It's the kind of rapport and relations that some of the board members would have with some of the executives. And for me, that has always been problematic. And it's on those bases that I'm raising this as a sore point that required urgent attention. And even going forward, it will have to be attended to quite expeditiously.
Still on page 1 of your statement, paragraph 3, you refer to a governance review process that had been undertaken by the previous board. Can you shed light about the contents in brief, not in detail? Just give the committee a broad overview of what that review, the findings were.
Thank you. Amongst the issues that were raised in that review, I did allude to the first ones, but the other points which I think are worthy of consideration is the extent to which meetings would be arranged outside of the diarized meetings, either of the board or the board committees. In other words, there was an excessive proportion of meetings being undertaken, which from where I'm seated would appear to be inappropriate. That would be one element. The next point, which I thought is very important, is, as I did mention earlier on, of course, is that the body language that took place, or the body politic, let me put it that way, that took place between executives and some of the board members was in itself quite inappropriate. I can perhaps attest to that fact even currently, that is still continuing.
What do you mean about the body language between the executives and some members of the board?
Just by way of illustration, the first port of call of any organization or institution would be the chief executive officer. I do believe that the relationship that is struck between the chief executive officer and the board is quite important, and any entry should be through the executive, the chief executive officer. An anomalous situation is prevalent within the South African Broadcasting Corporation, whereupon some of the board members would go directly to members of the executive without necessarily going through the executive or the chief executive officer. For me, that is quite anomalous. I don't believe it bodes well for good governance, because it does suggest that something untoward is happening and it shouldn't be.
Which committees of the board did you serve?
I served in a number of committees, one of which was the Human Resources and Remunerations Committee. I served in we called it the PBS Committee, in other words, it dealt with the broadcasting matters. I also served in the Risk Committee and the Social and Ethics Committee.
Still on page 1 of your statement, you're referring to, I think it's the 4th paragraph, 1, 2, where you say there were definitely serious flaws and weaknesses in the governance of the board then. No, I'm sorry, I think I've asked that question. The second issue you're raising, you say there was no proper follow-up in respect of the audit findings. That's where I want us to zoom to. And the risk register was not strictly adhered to. Can you just unpack that for the committee? What do you mean by that?
What I meant was the report that I had set off, which covered the period during the chairpersonship of Dr. Ngubane. That's what the report outlined. And I do believe that some of the matters were actually attended to in the board in which I served, because there was a point at which the audit, should I say the audit trail, was substantially dealt with, and there were just a few items outstanding that required attention. But with respect to the risk register, I think that has always been a sticking sore. It's a matter that still requires attention as I speak right now, because you would see red lights flashing, because those issues would require attention. Matters pertaining to the extent to which security mechanisms are put into place and how the assets would be taken care of. To some degree, these were quite problematic. So what I was alluding to was a report that I found, that I saw, which was previously handled and done by an audit committee or an audit company on behalf of the SABC.
Section 1311 of the Broadcasting Act reads, the board controls the affairs of the corporation. Now, there were annual reports prepared by the Auditor General. There were findings, adverse findings, and there were certain actions that required to be taken by the corporation to remedy the identified deficiencies. How did the board ensure that those deficiencies are attended to by the executives?
May I ask, sir, for which year?
During the period that you were the member of the board.
There was an instance whereby, I may not recollect the actual years, where the SABC received disclaimers. I think it was 2 years in succession. Subsequent to that, there was a greater preponderance towards addressing some of the deficiencies that were there. That happened around 2013, 2014, and there was progression in trying to clear and deal with those matters, which I believe was quite good. And I think one needs to give credit to the leadership at that point in time. I think it was Ms. Mogobo who was in charge of the process and making sure that those audit matters were attended to. There were others, of course, which were outside of the control of the corporation. Just to give an example, the issue pertaining to licenses, television licenses and all that, it was a sticking sore, and I think it was a problem that even now has not been resolved. I think it's going to take a little while to get to grips with it, largely because the understanding between the AG, the Auditor General, and SARS is quite divergent. It requires some kind of mitigation to be able to come to a resolution.
You have half answered my question because you're referring to a period when Ms. Mogobo was there. Now we know that at some point, Ms. Mogobo had left the corporation. Can you take us from that process forward? How has the board ensured that the deficiencies identified by the Auditor General, a Chapter 9 institution, get to be attended to?
What has since transpired, in terms of my recollection, is that there has been a regression that has been happening. And again, I do believe that it's got to do with leadership. Most importantly, the kind of oversight role that the board would play over the executive was to a large degree undermined. And it then resulted into this regression that I'm referring to. I'm of the firm view that it could have been different if there was greater firmness. I'll give an illustration. The current chairperson was quite, or should I say he mollycoddled some of the executives, particularly the person who was acting in the position of Chief Operating Officer. And the kind of relationship they had was, for me, quite problematic. And there's been a common denominator, maybe taking you backwards just a little bit to indicate that from the report that I studied, that I checked during the Dr. Ngubani's chairpersonship, to the period when Ms. Tshabalala was the chairperson, and to the current situation where Professor Magube is the chairperson, or was the chairperson, let me put it that way, there has been a common thread. And the common denominator has been one person, Mr. Motsoeneng. And that for me became a problem because it created a situation whereby the Group Chief Executive Officer has been undermined throughout.
You see, you were occupying a very special position, and your role was different to that of an ordinary member of the public watching these proceedings. You had a fiduciary responsibility towards the corporation. You're now saying there was a regression. What did you do as a board member? Forget about others, but what did you do to address these challenges you're pointing out?
In all the instances when something untoward happens, I always raised my objections. I could not be remiss of my responsibilities because in terms of my fiduciary duties, it was really up to me to make sure that I make a shout out when it is necessary. I never shied away from doing that, and I constantly made sure that I raise my concerns and make sure that that is expressed and captured in the minutes of either the board or any committee that I was sitting on.
were you alone in the board in seeing this regression you're referring to? If not, what are the members of the board, what were the other members of the board doing to assist you on the issues you're raising to address this regression?
The reality of the matter is that
there was a complaint, I'm not sure if you are aware, Ms. Mogobo had testified just before you came in, and she did raise concern about the lack of support from the board in certain instances. What would be your comment to that?
the implementation of the strategy is the responsibility of the executives. It is the duty of the board to have oversight in making sure that there is implementation of that strategy. There may be isolated incidents that I may not be aware of where the support was not provided, whether it is the board in its collective sense or maybe individual members, I may not be certain. But insofar as I do recollect, we did our utmost best. There may have been some other instances whereby there could have been differences in opinions insofar as the implementation is concerned. In those instances, I'm sure there would have been challenges. I may not be sure, unless if there's a specific matter, I can be able to respond to it.
There was a meeting that I'm interested in between the Minister of Communications in the form of Ms. Mutambi. The first meeting she had with the board. It was not a board meeting, but it was a meeting between the shareholder and the board. At that meeting, were there any particular issues that the minister had raised that had concerned you?
If my memory serves me well, it was between the 2nd and the 3rd of July 2014. We were at Magaliesburg for a strategic retreat of the Human Resources Committee, deliberating on a whole range of issues, the strategy and how to be able to make sure that it is implemented. It so happened that out of the blue, the minister appeared, and she was not part and parcel of that meeting, I must be frank. But because it was her first interaction with us, the program had to be changed to accommodate her. She was accompanied by a legal advisor and some of the advisors. And she, for all intents and purposes, indicated that she's not happy with what has been happening in the board. In fact, her actual words were that the board is not functioning accordingly. Therefore, it is dysfunctional. And she's got reasons to believe that this has to be remedied as a matter of urgency. It's an exercise that took quite a while, but the unfortunate part was that some of us were chided in that meeting for something that I couldn't even put my finger onto, that we were undermining the authority of the chairperson. At that stage, it was still Mrs. Tshabalala, and some of the executives. It was one of the most difficult meetings that one attended. And it then gave an indication that we're going to have a long haul insofar as our relationship with the minister was concerned.
I gather that at some point the board, let me not say the board, certain functions of the board, certain powers of the board, were through a document called Delegation of Authority Framework, delegated to the executive directors. Who was responsible for delegating the board functions to the executives?
Referring specifically to this document?
To the delegation of authority.
Perhaps I may have to give a background. The question of the delegation of authority framework arose out of the amended version of the Memorandum of Incorporation. Ordinarily, the memorandum should be amended by the board and be able to submit it to SABC for approval or ratification and checking and all that. But we were surprised to know that it was done by the minister. If you look into the memorandum itself, it bears her signature, not the signature of the chairperson of the board, which is quite anomalous, insofar as I'm concerned. A shareholder representative taking the responsibility of the board, for me, is a bit of a problem. That MOI changed a number of issues, including the responsibilities that ordinarily would have resided with the board, but were then transferred to the executives. It then gave rise to the development of, the delegation of authority framework to be accordingly amended. I would safely say that the authority and the powers of the board were usurped and be devolved directly to the executives, which for me was quite problematic. I thought I should just put it in that context. But obviously it had to come to the board for ratification, which normally is done at the point at which the annual general meeting of the corporation takes place, which is chaired by the minister, and that's what happened. It was just a rubber stamping exercise.
Now, the powers of a board, as per your explanation, gets to be taken away from the board, given to the executives by the minister. What does the board do with that state of affairs? What did you in particular do?
I must say that I was quite alarmed because it was an anomalous situation and the relationships were already on a rocky start. And it was quite evident that if anything was going to happen, it was going to be very rambunctious in how we're going to handle matters. And one would ordinarily try to defer to the minister with the hope that things would be done accordingly, but didn't pan out that way. So the point I'm making here is that it was quite an unfortunate situation, and one left it at that point.
So you never raised it yourself in the board meetings? You never canvassed this anomaly with your colleagues?
I wouldn't really sit back and not do anything about it. I did canvass my views with my colleagues, or at least some of my colleagues. It's quite unfortunate that it didn't resonate to the entire board to be reconsidered. And it was very clear that there was a solid line of divide between board members. And in that way, things didn't really augur very well, which of course led to some of the board members resigning much more prematurely.
It's a sensitive issue, and I want to stay a bit longer on this matter. The powers of a board are assumed without the board's consent. Does this matter get to be tabled in the agenda of a board meeting to be discussed?
If it was a normal board and a normal institution, that wouldn't have been a problem. It was a very unusual situation, fraught with a lot of contradictions, precisely because it required political muscle, in some instances, to be able to find resolution or expression. So if it was a company, out there which is listed in any other way, it was going to be easy to do that. In this particular case, it has been very difficult, I must say. In fact, I may add to say that you certainly require a certain level of madness to can want to serve on the SABC board.
The Public Protector's report, when, let me just get the correct citation of the report, when governance and ethics fail. You are aware of that report?
Very much so, sir.
Did that report ever serve in one of the board meetings to be considered?
If you don't mind, sir, I'd prefer to give you a background and then I can be able to clarify how it came about. The report of the Public Protector was treated in a very different manner. Just for starters, at the point at which it was released, when the Public Protector released that document, we were in a board meeting, and one of the board members, Ms. Khalidis, was able to download it and shared it with us at that point. But it became apparent that there was what you call an interim report that was released much earlier. I think it was a year before, around December or so, which report none of the board members had sight of, that interim report. We later discovered around January that indeed this is what transpired, and we posed the question to the chairperson, Ms. Tshabalala. And she said no, she received the report. It was addressed to her specifically and not to board members, and it was written confidential, and she couldn't share it with us, which I found to be very odd. But in taking the process forward, at the point at which the report was shared amongst us by one of our colleagues, she was taken to task that she had no authority at all to circulate the document amongst board members. It's not her duty or responsibility. And of course, that was a very difficult situation, if I may say. Finally, when we had to get to deliberate on the report, after it was released, it was after about a month or so. We were told that it has to be split into streams, human resources, audit, or finance, etc., which was done by the chairperson, by the way. And we couldn't understand how this could have arisen, because ordinarily it should have been the board that does that and come up with a way forward. But as we were going through that process, there was a law firm that was appointed to guide us on how to handle the Public Protector's report, attorneys. And they were the ones who made responses to some of the remedial actions that were required directly to the Public Protector through the chairperson, without having processed that through the board. That for me was quite problematic. When we raised these issues, particularly in the Human Resources Committee, chaired then by Professor Khumalo, we were quite livid about this matter because we felt that it was our duty and our responsibility as board members, because it was quite evident that some of the matters that needed to have been done related to human resources, matters pertaining to actions that must be taken against those who have been found wanting, particularly Mr. Motsoeneng, issues pertaining to increase in remuneration and salaries, etc. All those matters require the Human Resources Committee and the Audit Committee to be able to look into. But it was not handled appropriately or properly. And that for me was quite problematic. It was a bone of contention. We continued to fight around that. Even to date, I don't believe we had ever come to a resolution of that.
As a board member, giving the committee an objective view and also understanding that this response will implicate you, would you then say the board dealt with the Public Protector's report in the correct way or not?
I'll add to what I said earlier on. I did indicate that it was not appropriately handled, and I do believe that it could have been done differently. I'm of the firm view that with the necessary passion, the necessary gumption, and the necessary preparedness, it could have been done differently, but it wasn't.
There was a special board meeting. You're referring it in your statement, paragraph 2. Sorry, in page 2, relating to the appointment of the acting COO as the permanent CEO. Can you share with the committee how that came about?
After the meeting of the 2nd and 3rd of July, having met with the minister in Magaliesburg, I think it was on a Wednesday and Thursday, on Friday we received notification that an urgent board meeting is going to be convened where the minister would want to interact with us. It was scheduled for the 7th, I think it was on a Monday. Interestingly, it was in the evening, around 6 o'clock, when this meeting was planned. Arriving at the SABC, there was no minister to be seen. Instead, the meeting was chaired by Ms. Tshabalala. She told us that there's an instruction that we need to exercise or to execute. It relates to the appointment of the chief operating officer. Before she could say very much, she flashed a letter purportedly coming from Mr. Motsoeneng's lawyers, indicating that he's been acting in the position for quite a considerable length of time and extolling his virtues about his achievements within the South African Broadcasting Corporation, and therefore suggested, or not only suggested, but more or less gave an injunction that he's got to be appointed on a full-time basis as the chief operating officer. I took umbrage to this because it was quite anomalous, it was problematic. I raised my concerns that if there's anything that ought to be done, there must be due process that has to unfold. And due process implies that the position has to be advertised. It must be able to articulate quite clearly what the job description is, the role specification, the minimum qualification requirements of the position. There must be a service provider appointed to be able to do the shortlisting process in order to make sure that it is a transparent process. But most importantly, there must be a panel constituted to interview the shortlisted candidates, conduct interviews, but also there must be a competency assessment included within that broad framework. And finally, the 3 names, in terms of what the Act says, can then be submitted to the minister for her consideration and probable recommendation, and the name that emerges will then have to be ratified by the board. I'm listing these steps intentionally because none of these were done. It was I don't know how to put it, it was like a skopskitten donor, whereby we were literally cajoled into making sure that we come to a decision that very evening. It was a long night because I think it went on until about 11 in the evening, whereby, as it has been the tradition then, if we do not have consensus, because I do believe that, especially in a board, you need to have a collegial kind of relationship. Even the leadership must be such that you try to move towards a consensual arrangement. That wasn't the case. It is quite evident that this was already prejudged, and there could have been a meeting of some grouping before the meeting, and they'd come to a decision. So when a vote was demanded, not even requested, we were then told that it has to be done that very evening. And a vote ensued, and the majority of the board members recommended that Mr. Motsoeneng should be the COO.
How did you vote at that meeting? Did you support the recommendation for his appointment, or did you abstain, or did you vote against?
I was very clear in my mind that I was not going to legitimize an illegitimate process. And my standpoint was very clear that I'm not going to give it any sense of credibility by voting for it, so I actually abstained.
We now know that there's a Western Cape High Court judgment that found that outcome, the outcome of that process, Mr. Motsoeneng's appointment, to be unlawful and irrational. Did that come as a surprise to you?
On the contrary, I was vindicated.
How did the board exercise financial oversight over the executives?
Ordinarily, the process is as follows. A number of committees are set in place. There's a committee that dealt with audits, the audit committee. There was a committee that dealt with matters pertaining to finances and procurement of goods and services. And of course, there were others that were there, but specifically around financial matters, certainly the CFO and the CEO would report to the committee, who will then make recommendations that will have to be ratified by the board. That's the manner in which the exercise was, or the oversight was done over the executives around financial matters.
You know there is a decision on local content. The 90-10% local content for radio and 80-20% local content for television. Was the board ever involved in the development of this important policy decision?
I served on the committee that dealt with the public and commercial services and public and, should I say public services. I do not recall public broadcasting services. I do not recall, not even once, that such a matter ever came to the committee. I only read about this in the newspapers when Mr. Motsoeneng indicated that it took him 10 minutes to arrive at that decision to decide that it shall be implemented. So that's his decision. It's not the decision of any of the board's committees, nor the board itself. It has never been placed before the board.
Now, you have an executive that is on a frolic of his own, in your words. What does the board do given this scenario? And specifically, what is it that you did about it?
In all the instances, I would raise my objections and I would demand that such matters be placed on the agenda of the board committees so that there should be proper deliberations. More often than not, those requests will not be acceded to. I can give an example of one instance, which I do believe I've given you a copy thereof, as to what transpired on the 29th of September 2016, when I made a request that we need to have a meeting prior to coming to the Portfolio Committee on the 5th of October. I don't know whether you have a copy thereof. I did submit it to you, sir, as part and parcel of the attachment. It does give you an indication of the kind of approaches that one would do in order to make sure that situations could be remedied or at least to be attended to. This, of course, was not taken into consideration. As I'm seated here today, on the 8th of December, I haven't received a response to my request.
The amendment of the editorial policy of 2016, which amongst others took away the powers of the editor-in-chief from the group CEO and moved those to the group COO. Were you as a member of the board aware of that decision? Did the board approve that editorial policy? And what was the process that was followed?
Insofar as my recollection is concerned, there was a so-called public participation process. There were so-called provincial visits that were embarked upon by the members of the executive committee to the different provinces, where we were told that they were able to solicit views and ideas as to what should be contained into the editorial policy. Subsequent to that, a report was presented directly to the board, and not through the committee, directly to the board, that this is the editorial policy and it requires ratification. I was really upset about that because it's a very thick document. It's no less than 50 pages, and it can't be placed before the board for ratification just like that. One needs to apply one's mind, read, go through the document before it is approved. But ordinarily should have gone to one of the committees of the board. And how it was approved, again, it's by a vote and not by consensus. One was defeated, and that was that.
With the appointment of the COO, we now know what the Western Cape High Court had said. It was unlawful and irrational. We now know the Supreme Court of Appeal would not even entertain that issue. Why then is Mr. Motsoeneng still having a position at the SABC? In view, adding to that, the Chapter 9 institution report of the public protector.
Again, say if you were to go through the annexure that I presented to you, I didn't really take kindly to the appointment of Mr. Motsoeneng as what was called Group Executive Corporate Affairs. But I think what also compounded the problem for me was what I read in the newspapers, that he was given a bonus of about 11.4 million. It has never gone through any of the board's processes, any of its committees, insofar as I do recollect, because I sit on the HR committee. And for me, it's quite problematic. So I still treat it as an allegation until proven otherwise. But the crux of the matter here is that some of the relationships that I spoke about would evolve around the chairperson and some of the executives, particularly Mr. Motsoeneng. It may well be that this whole question of him being appointed into this position, in spite of what the court has said, could have been done by the chairperson. I do not know, because I have no evidence. I can only suspect that the appointment might have been done by the group, the acting group chief executive officer. I wouldn't know. As it were, I find it to be completely unacceptable in the main that the court found him wanting, and therefore he shouldn't have been an employee of the South African Broadcasting Corporation. That shouldn't have been the case.
One of the senior executives in the form of the COO, an employee of the board, who the court has made a decision adverse to his relationship with the corporation. It must concern the board, isn't it? as the board to employ Mr. Motsoeneng had effectively been set aside by the court. Does the board call a meeting? I mean, you seem to have had the passion to call special meetings at any time. In this instance, is a meeting called to say we've got a bit of a challenge here? This is the court ruling. We need to consider and have a decision on how we proceed on this matter.
So, another anomaly ensued, and I may not have captured it in my statement, but I think it's important for me to raise it here. We saw an emergence of a style of taking decisions via round robin, a plethora of them, which for me has always been problematic. And I've always expressed my views about this, and I'm sure it is minuted, that I do not like this round robin thing. It's very clear that when people want to avoid an engagement, an interaction, they would rather settle for a round robin exercise, because you become anonymous in a sense. And no one would know how you voted on a particular matter and all that, and it became the style of the corporation. At the instance at which one wrote this letter, one was quite aware about the points that have been raised, a whole range of them. And I'm sure between January this year and right up to September this year, you would find that there were no less than 20 round robins approvals. It can't be right. So, no, there was no board meeting convened. There was no intention to even want to discuss that particular matter.
No further questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. It is... No, set it up. I've got to coach my team here as well. Honorable Mokoena, you've got 5 minutes, and your 5 minutes starts now, sir.
I need 10. Yes. Okay, just to confirm, have you been threatened by anyone at the SABC for you being here? No?
I wish they could try.
Okay. Excellent. Then you're the person I need to ask these questions to. Just to get a sense, again, there's a whirlwind that is happening within the board and SABC in general. Who is at the center of it? Who is the focal point of this whirlwind?
I thought I did indicate that there's a common denominator in all this. From the time when Dr. Ngubane was the chairperson to the current situation where Professor Magube is the chairperson, and that's Mr. Hlaudi Motsoeneng.
Hlaudi Motsoeneng, who was appointed, okay, so there was a meeting at which he was supposed to have been introduced to the minister and so on and so forth, and the minister suggests that Mr. Hlaudi must be appointed to the position of COO. Is that correct? You were at that meeting?
Yes, sir.
And then a second meeting that happened in which he was then bulldozed on the board. And we're also told that the minister was in and around the vicinity of the SABC at the time. Is that correct?
The timing of her coming to the board meeting or to the boardroom was quite, it was with striking alacrity, because immediately when the decision was made, she came through the door.
And then this all happens after the report had been released by the public by the public protector.
Correct, sir.
Okay. Now you say that the minister changed the MOI on her own and changed and gave powers from the board members to the executive. Can you give us some of the, very short, because I actually need 10 minutes. Can you give us examples of some of those powers that were given to the executives?
One classical example was the appointment of executive or group executives. That responsibility is to reside with the board. But now it changed. It is the responsibility and the purview of the executive directors, in other words, the group chief executive officer, the COO, and the CFO. They can do that and merely inform the board of their decisions.
So effectively, that then gave the CEO the powers to appoint Mr. Hlaudi from COO to Group Executive Corporate. Is that correct?
In this particular case, if a person is in Hollywood mode and is acting and can appoint someone else, especially to that particular responsibility, I would imagine it should have been the board which is doing that and not the other way around. So, yeah, that's what might have transpired.
It was then said that at that level of Group Executive Corporate, the appointment would then have to be given to the minister to endorse. Do you know if that process took place?
The point of the endorsement or ratification of any position would relate to the three. In other words, the Group Chief Executive Officer, the Chief Operating Officer, and the Chief Financial Officer. Those were the three that requires the minister's ratification. As for the group executives, it's a different scenario altogether. Under normal circumstances, those will have to be handled by any of the board's committees and then be able to be endorsed by the board. But things changed after the MOI came about. What has been the practice quite recently was that they would appoint people from within. We wouldn't even see an advertisement. It could have been internal, but never external. In other words, it would be the fish pond being stirred, and we then have musical chairs being played. Could be by Buddy Buddy, Can You Paradigm, and that's what could happen.
Okay, and then you said that the group GCEO was undermined in the time of Ms. Mogobo. Was that the case during the time of Mr. Oguma?
One must remember that Mr. Oguma was appointed, insofar as I do recollect, by Mr. Motsoeneng to come to the corporation, having been recruited from the Office of the Auditor General. So they have a very close rapport. I can't see that being the case for him to be undermined. He just had to do what the piper does. When he plays his whistle, all you need to do is to dance.
That's it, Honorable Mokoena.
I don't get one more question.
No, if I'm generous, I'll give you my time. Honorable Mathangu, I'm not sure. You next, Honorable. I'm just warning you. Yes, Swart, you next. You'll be after Mathangu. Mathangu?
Chair, thank you. Vusi Mavuso.
Sorry.
Okay. We spoke about the appointments now. What about the pagings? It happened during your tenure, I suppose, of some staff members in the SABC.
That's correct, sir. You will recall when I was here on the 5th of October.
No, it's a different committee, this one.
No, I was here in Parliament
Okay.
then. There was an issue that I raised in the Portfolio Committee on Communications, that there has been what are called corporate purging. And I had a problem with that because I did mention, of course, that no fewer than 11 executives have been kicked out, quite unceremoniously so. And I do believe that it's a problem on its own because you lose out on the institutional memory and it doesn't help the organization.
What was the intervention of the board, yourselves as board members, on that matter?
Call me a serial question asker, perhaps, but what I did, I demanded that we should have a meeting to deliberate on these issues, and which request was not acceded to.
What constitutes the board of SABC? Or who? Well, whichever way you'd like to answer the question. When you say there's a board of SABC, what are we talking about?
The barest minimum that one can be able to refer to as a board is 9. Anything below that would be incorrect and therefore could not be able to take any binding decisions.
Obviously, there are things that are happening in the SABC as we speak, including interdicting the work of this committee. Who would have a local stand to carry out that responsibility from you as a board member?
If you were to ask me as a former board member, I'll try to respond, but I'm not a board member anymore. I've resigned from the board.
Yes.
I can't see how decisions are going to be made because, as it were, you can't have one person having all the authority of a board and taking decisions that are binding. It's quite anomalous. I don't know what's happening there.
The responsibility of the board secretary, I mean, we are told that there were times when the board were actually getting their dictates from the board secretary. Are you aware of that?
Yes, I am.
Your take?
There's an instance that I can refer to when I was virtually dragooned to appear before the minister to go to her office, that I needed to have a one-on-one with her. And my meeting took place at 6 o'clock in the morning. And what transpired then, of course, was that the minister was not there. Instead, it was a legal advisor and one of the employees, I think is the chief of staff. Our document was flashed to me to say that these are my misdemeanors that I had committed. I arrive late at meetings, I'm disruptive in meetings, and I have ambitions of becoming the group chief executive officer, and all such things, which for me was quite nonsensical. I was very, very upset by that because it really impugned on my integrity. I never came late to any of the meetings, nor missed board meetings when requested to, because I took my responsibility quite seriously as a board member. And of course, the sum total of it all is that I received another letter that said that I must give reasons why I should not resign from the board after the report that was designed and crafted by the company secretary. So, yeah, we didn't have a very good relationship with her, especially after that incident. And it's very clear that she does play a particular role within the corporation.
1 second. Where does the board derive its mandate?
From the Broadcasting Act.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Honourable Swartz, you've got 5 minutes. That includes both ways.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow up on my colleagues' questions, the issue of you being summoned to appear before the minister, that must have been very unusual to you, because surely you are accountable in terms of the Broadcasting Act to the board and not to the minister in as much as any disciplinary action is concerned. Was that the way that you were treated? Would you say that that was not correct in terms of your understanding of your accountability as a board member?
Absolutely correct, because my impression was that I was going to have an engagement with the minister, probably talk about my concerns, my frustrations, recommendations, and suggestions. I thought it was going to be a very cordial meeting. Little did I know that there was an ace up someone's sleeves.
And do you think that the fact that you voted or you abstained in the vote, was that counted against you subsequently in actions of the board? And would you think that that was a reason for attempts to get rid of you or to remove you from the board?
It could be one of those.
Just in that regard, you expressed yourself very strongly on the fact that you seemed to be steamrolled on that decision. And one would have thought that you would have voted against it, but you chose to abstain. Why would you abstain and not oppose the vote? Is there any particular reason for that?
I did express myself, sir, to say that I didn't want to legitimize an illegitimate process. I felt that the voting shouldn't even take place, for starters, because the process was flawed. And it's on those bases that I felt that I didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Just on the issue of the legal opinion, which was obviously the attorneys, which seemed to, in the view of certain persons, replace the public protector's remedial actions. And then we saw that there was a disciplinary action purportedly to be instituted against Mr. Motsoeneng. Can you explain to us, was that legal opinion? I noticed that the opinion says the board instructed us, and clearly you've said already that the board, it was only a certain member, you weren't aware of the instruction to those attorneys. But the disciplinary action, were you aware of that, and was the board aware of that, and the whole conducting of that disciplinary action against Mr. Motsoeneng?
The decision to, let me put it this way, the decision to appoint people who are going to manage the whole process, in other words, the chairperson and the evidence lead, etc., was done via round robin. But in the first instance, the original people who were supposed to have conducted that were changed. I think they were changed about 3 times. That then implied that something is not right. By the time the hearing set, as I did indicate, it was via round robin. It was very clear that a desired outcome was long planned, and the particular committee, for want of a better word, your prosecutor and chairperson, might have been briefed otherwise to make sure that the desired outcome is achieved. I found it very, very odd that he was acquitted on all those charges that were laid against him.
Thank you. Just explain to us this concept of the round-robin decisions. The round-robin decisions, was that a phone call to individual persons, or was it a telephone conference, or how did that take place?
Normally, with a round-robin decision, documents will be circulated amongst board members, which indicate that this is what is required, vote yes or no, and then transmit it back to the company secretary.
So there was no discussion or anything really? And you would consider that a breach of corporate governance?
There may be exceptions to the rule. If it is exceptional, under very exceptional circumstances, it can be utilized. But if it becomes the norm, then I have a problem with it.
Honourable Khoza and Honourable Loliwe, could I plead with you, excuse me, to allow Honourable Walters to go, because he has to catch a Commonwealth business, and then you'll follow immediately afterwards. Oh, okay. All right, and after him, we'll then go back.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to go first. Mr. Mavuso, thank you very much for answering the questions where you have been doing. May I ask, just for clarity's sake, when the Minister came to the meeting unannounced at Sun City, I think you said you were at. Is that right? The Minister arrived at a meeting unannounced. You said?
In Makhalis.
Oh, Makhalis, sorry. Okay. So, it was at that meeting the Minister first mooted the proposal of Mr. Motsoeneng being appointed permanently as CEO. Is that correct?
That is correct. In fact, how she put it, she mentioned that she couldn't understand why this matter has not been resolved until thus far. Okay. Precisely because she was able to, using her words, elevate a document from court insofar as the claim that the late Mr. Vusi Mavuso had on the position of COO. And according to her, that matter is as good as resolved. Okay. And therefore, it's important that we finalize this issue and appoint a person permanently, and the sooner it is done, the better.
All right. Did anyone raise with the Minister the Public Protector's report and the findings against Mr. Motsoeneng?
No, we didn't raise that with her. We believe that it was the responsibility of the board to deal with that matter.
Okay, all right. And so, do you think the Minister was unaware of the Public Protector report, if she was insisting on Mr. Motsoeneng being appointed full-time?
Insofar as I do recollect, the minister is a lawyer and therefore could have been aware or should have been aware of this.
Okay. Then at the meeting on the 7th of July, I think it is, where you were called, that Monday meeting, 7th of July, and it was put to you without prior notice that you were going to now vote on the issue of Mr. Motsoeneng being appointed full-time. You said the meeting took 5 hours from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. Did anyone raise a public protector's report there?
The discussion was quite broad. It included the issue of the public protector or the report of the public protector, amongst others, and the question around due process that ought to be followed.
The point I'm trying to get at, if the public protector has found in a report that a certain individual is unfit to hold that office because their qualifications are fraud, or he committed fraud with regards to his qualifications, I don't see how the board could entertain appointing him full-time for that position. Do you see what I'm getting at? It should have been a fait accompli.
I agree with you, but as you can imagine, it was a majority decision that prevailed.
All right. And then you said the minister appeared as soon as the decision was made. Is that right?
That is correct.
11 o'clock at night.
Time of the night, yes.
So she arrived, that's quite amazing, 11 o'clock at night in the SABC building in Auckland Park. Just happened to be there at the same time.
Coincidence is just too good to be true.
All right. Chair, that's all my questions I wanted to ask. Thank you very much.
Bon voyage. Honourable Koza.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Mavuso. Based on your evidence, what you've reported to us, it appears as though the broadcasting policies weighted decisions seem to have been taken by Mr. Motsoeneng, who appears to have totalitarian and imperious powers. Now, what I want to know from you, what would you attribute this to? Because this is a COO. This is not even a chair of the board. This is not even a C. This is not even the chair of the board or the CEO of the company.
Honourable Member, this was an issue with most of us in the board, particularly when one picked up that this particular individual had relationships, very close proximity with chairpersons of the board, past and present. And that for us was a problem. And how he was able to make decisions, it's quite evident that it led to the undermining of the group chief executive officer, because the chairperson would defend that individual. It was problematic.
Can you confirm if Mr. Motsoeneng did receive a commission for the multi-choice contract? And how much was that? Was that the board decision, if it did happen? A commission or bonus, I don't know, what did you call it?
I wouldn't know, ma'am. I saw in the newspapers that he received a bonus of 11.4 million. It's on this basis that I wrote the letter to say that we need to deliberate on these issues because they're quite important, very material, and require our urgent attention so that one can be able to verify the truth and the facts. I do not know. Up to now, even now, I don't know.
Now, during your tenure, the Auditor General reported that there was about 3.4 billion of irregular expenditure. And you served in the risk committee. Were there risks that you identified? Did you bring those risks to the attention of the board? And what were they?
The issues that relate to the findings of the Auditor General found expression in the Audit Committee. Some of them, of course, were raised by the Risk Committee. In other words, there was close liaison between the risk committee and the audit committee, and would receive what I may call a dashboard of issues that require attention from the head of risk to sensitize the board so that we can be able to take remedial action or appropriate actions. These have always been raised, and the matters would be put before the full board for consideration so that proper implementation can then take place or corrective measures could be exercised. Yes, we did take those matters into account.
I just need you to clarify the position around Ms. Tshabalala and the chairperson of the board and the COO, given the fact that you said earlier on, if I heard you correctly, as the board, you were always there to support the executive. How would you characterize that relationship between Ms. Tshabalala and the CEO?
CEO or the COO?
CEO.
CEO. It was a very, let me put it this way. At the beginning, there was very good and cordial relationships. But things started to come to a head, particularly when the matter pertaining to the set-top box control hit the headlines. Remember that it is linked to the BDM, the Broadcasting Digital Migration Policy. And the policy was quite clear that encryption had to be put in, but it went against, or rather, this was not strictly adhered to, because at one point when the then Minister Yunus Karim embarked on an exercise to solicit views and embark on a public participation process insofar as the encryption process was concerned. In one instance, I think it was required of us to be able to indicate what the position of the SABC was. It was still at the point at which we had taken a decision prior to that as the interim board to say that there shall be encryption. But of course, at the public hearings,
Please summarize, sir. Summarize
at the public hearings, Ms. Tshabalala and Ms. Mogobo did not agree. Because on the one hand, we supported the view that there should be encryption. Ms. Tshabalala didn't. And it created tensions which then ensued from thence on.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm sure you are happy that I am done.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Honorable Loliwe.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Mavuso, you've painted a gloomy picture about the situation at the SABC. As a principled person, what kept you there despite all this for you to only resign here now in October?
Honorable Member, I'm not a quitter. I believe in fighting until you find sanity prevailing. But in this particular instance, I think I became insane myself. And I reached a point where I couldn't take it anymore. It was just too much.
Shame.
You are also indicating that at some stage when Mr. Maguve joined the SABC, chairpersonship of committees was shared amongst about 4 people. What happened to people who were chairpersons previously before his arrival? Was there a reshuffle or what on his arrival?
To give you a picture, Honorable Member, when there was a fully fledged board, chairpersonship was split amongst a number of members. For example, Advocate Tambingosi Bonagele chaired the Risk Committee, Professor Kumalo chaired the Human Resources Committee, and Mr. Lubisi chaired the Audit Committee. There were a number of people who chaired specific committees at that stage. But after their resignation and, of course, the unceremonious ejection of the other board members, the chairpersonship was then accorded to those who remained, excluding Mr. Naidu and myself. So it was the rest of the board members who remained at that stage. One would chair 3, others 2, etc. And it was clear that a line of divide has been drawn.
You have indicated that in many instances, recruitment processes were not followed. For instance, with the appointment of Mr. Hlaudi, you are drawing the picture. With the appointment of Mr. Agoma, you are also drawing the picture. Are there any instances you can share with us where this is happening, or it is only the 2 positions where recruitment processes are not followed for appointments?
Honourable Member, when Mr. Agoma was appointed as the Chief Financial Officer, which is a substantive post now, a due process had unfolded. There was an advertisement in the newspapers, there was shortlisting, and an agency was appointed to do that. There was a competence assessment process. We received those reports. Then there was an interviewing panel that was constituted. He was interviewed, and he was found to be a very suitable candidate for CFO. So insofar as he is concerned, I think due process was followed. I would have expected the same with Mr. Motsoeneng, but he didn't. And with respect to the others below that, in other words, your group executives, I don't even know what happened. Would receive a memo just before a press conference that these are the people who've been appointed into these particular positions.
Thank you, Chair.
Honourable Van Dam.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Mavuso, you've painted a picture of undue influence by the Minister of Communications in breach of the Broadcasting Act. I mean, she burst through the doors close to midnight, like an uninvited mother-in-law. And so you've painted this picture. Was there ever an instance where the president's name was invoked for decisions to be made? I mean, the minister is alleged to have said to the late Hope Zinde, "Ubaba loves Hlaudi, we must protect him." Are you aware of any other instance where either there was said to be an instruction from the president or the president's name was invoked in these decisions that you had to make?
Not that I know of him, no.
All right, thank you. And then you mentioned that into Mr. Magove's tenure as chairperson, there were several meetings that were held that were in court. What were those decisions that were taken at meetings that were in court?
Usually, if a meeting is not forming a quorum, it will stand in for the next meeting, and then, of course, the decisions will then be formally ratified as and when it corrected.
Oh, I see. So when the meetings were in court, no decisions were taken?
There wouldn't be an implementation, at least.
In terms of the approval, firstly, of 2 decisions, one relating to the increase of Mr. Motsoeneng's salary. So it was increased in 2014 by 1 million, and then the last financial year it was increased by a further 500,000. Was that decision approved by the board? And also the endless litigation the SABC has been engaged in protecting Mr. Motsoeneng's position. Did the board approve the costs of that litigation and that litigation itself?
So far as the increases are concerned, that has not really been formally ratified or coming to the committees of the board. But the litigations, the plethora of litigations, I think it's a problem. The SABC has become a very litigious organization or institution, and I'm sure the Parliament will find expression in dealing with those matters. So how the approvals were made, you can leave the rest to imagination.
And needed to be clear, did the board approve litigation on behalf of Mr. Motsoeneng?
The point I'm making, ma'am, is that in most instances, I would speak for myself. I would be against some of the decisions that would be taken, particularly around court cases. I did mention that there were a number of decisions that were taken via round robin. I would not approve of those, but invariably you will see a litigation taking place, giving an impression that it was a unanimous or a majority decision that took that via round robin.
Okay, sorry, Mr. Mavuso, maybe I'm not understanding you properly. It's not clear in my mind. I need to know whether or not for each time the SABC spent money going to court to defend Mr. Motsoeneng, before that happened, was it put before the board, either by round robin or in any other manner? Was the approval of the board sought, or would you just read in the newspaper that the SABC is litigating on behalf of Mr. Neng? So I need to know, was it put in front of you, and would there be a majority decision approving litigation for Hlaudi Motsoeneng?
On matters pertaining to Mr. Motsoeneng, frankly speaking, nothing has come to the board to defend him or to litigate on his behalf, no.
Okay, thank you. Who would have approved that decision then? Would it have been the CEO, the CFO, if it wasn't the board, or Mr. Motsoeneng himself?
Because it has never been placed in front of us, I wouldn't know.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair.
Honorable Chauke.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Mr. Mavuso, when you were appointed a board member, already you had information of a malfunctioning of the board that we appointed to serve on. Informed by the report that you make mention of, there was already a report available. So you went into this board fully aware that the scope, skid, and donor, as you said, in that environment. Now, I'm trying to understand the efforts and not only of yourself, because you do mention of a group of you who were against this scope, skid, and donor arrangement that is happening there. Have yourself met as a group separately from the rest of the board members? You make mention Professor Khumalo and the rest of those who were against this malfunctioning of the board. If so, can you explain what were the issues that you were dealing with in that regard? The other area I want to understand is that, what is your view now that the entire board members have now resigned? We left obvious with the board does not exist anymore. Are you now satisfied that something new that can start will be able to assist and help the SABC, meaning that with everybody now that is gone, I will take it that maybe through your influence, because you've been a fighter there, and everybody has seen the light at the end. That's why everybody has now resigned. Are you satisfied now that there can be some kind of sanity after this process that we're engaging in? The third one is the issue of the judicial review on the public protector's remedial action. That position, that decision, was it taken by the board, and you were part of that decision? Was there a resolution taken of the board to challenge the public protector's report? The last one will be, are you aware that ICASA has opened a criminal case against the chairperson and someone else? If so, can you just share with us those experiences and your view around the judicial review?
Mr. Jog, you've raised a number of points. If I do, by any stretch of imagination, omit others, please forgive me, but I'm sure you'll remind me. The matter pertaining to ICASA, I was not aware that they've instituted a case against the SABC. No, I was not aware. And with respect to the judicial review of the public protector's remedial actions, I'm not aware about that the SABC has gone to court to try and get that reviewed, because it really wouldn't make sense. It's a very clear report. It's quite pointed, and I think it will be after the fact. Usually one has to do that within, if I do recollect, within 90 days. If you want to apply for judicial review, either 90 to 180 days, I'm not sure. But if that is the intention, it's well past midnight. I don't think that would be able to be considered. What is it that needs to be done? What is my view insofar as the way forward around the SABC? Let me make one point very strongly. At the point at which there would be finality and there's no board at all, not even one man standing, I'm of the firm view that anyone who's going to be appointed onto the SABC board should be a person who's gone through an exercise to deal with being a board member. For example, IOD would have courses that would help people to be able to get to grips with the reality. And there must be a measure of integrity that goes into being a board member so that one can be thoroughly scrutinized in so far as the fitness is concerned. The only underlying point should be to serve the public of the Republic of South Africa. And it should not be about personal quiddities and self-aggrandizement, no. The final point, which I do believe is important, is that the rigor in which the engagement is going to take place in selecting people must be much more intense. And there shouldn't be any favors or, for want of a better word, consideration because you are so and so and therefore this is what should be done. No. I don't know if I've omitted any of the questions.
Thank you, sir, even if you haven't, unfortunately. Ms. Gillian?
To amend the memorandum of incorporation. Is it not properly on? Okay, I'm not speaking properly into it. Did you at any stage decide or discuss the need for an amended memorandum of incorporation? Are you aware that it was amended, and are you aware that the minister signed it? And what do you think about that? Because it appears to have cemented the usurping of some of the board powers in terms of its mandate. Can you please comment on that?
I did make the point right at the beginning, Honourable Member, that I noticed and I realized that it was signed by the minister, and for me it's quite problematic. It's an anomaly. It should have been done by the board, and whoever's going to come into the next board, I think is an issue that will have to be taken into account. And I'm sure the Portfolio Committee on Communications will have to be seized with the matter and be able to give guidance and direction around it.
Thank you. Secondly, the role of the company secretary. It appears that the company secretary was unclear about the role that she's fulfilling to support the board members. Instead, she compiled a report at the instance of the minister. Are you aware of that report? Have you ever seen sight of it, accusing certain members of conflicts of interest?
The report, as I did indicate earlier on, was flashed by the minister's legal advisor when I was invited for the one-on-one. And I requested a copy and he flatly refused. I did request the copy, by the way, from the company secretary. She indicated that it's not her document, it's the minister's document, and that's where one can be able to get it. I've even given up on it. But suffice to mention that that role that she played was very divisive. It was very problematic, and it's not her domain. You can't have a company secretary assuming the role of a public protector of sorts and doing investigations nefariously and surreptitiously so without the knowledge of board members. It's unprofessional, it's unethical, and it cannot be countenanced.
Last question, Chairperson. We were informed by the Public Protector that her office compiled a comprehensive file for the DC of Mr. Motsoeneng. Were you aware of it? Was it ever discussed? Or was it simply just set aside because of the Mqunu attorney's investigation into how to deal with an implementation plan?
I was not aware of that.
Chair, that concludes.
Mr. Mavuso, thank you very much for agreeing to participate, and to members also for being so disciplined with time. So you are released. Honourable members, our next guest was scheduled for 4 o'clock. It is about 20 minutes to go. Now we can err on the side of Can I finish and I'll allow you to think? We can err on the side of caution, and I'm looking at my legal team, and wait until 4 o'clock and take this decision. Is that the route to go? No, oh, you want, no, I'm sorry. Eh? Okay, no, it's fine. No, it's fine. Honourable members, no. Besides that, we'll wait until 4, and we will take a decision on that. And then there are 2 points that we need to make about next week's program. So we'll conclude today's business. In other words, the next agenda item at 4 will be to deal with the SABC's absence or otherwise. Conclude that one, and then deal with next week's business. No, I'm saying tomorrow's business we will deal with at that time as well. Yeah. So members should be back here at 4 o'clock, and then we'll deliberate on the SABC board.
Well, you're watching SABC News. These are live visuals now from the Parliamentary inquiry into the SABC's board's fitness to hold office. Proceedings have been adjourned until about 4 p.m. we understand, in about 20 minutes' time. Former board member, you've just heard there, Vusi Mavuso, taking questions from MPs this afternoon. He's saying that the public protector's report on the SABC was not properly dealt with. Well, just yesterday, we did hear from the public protector, Vusi Mavuso. She already told the inquiry that she felt the SABC undermined the authority of her office. She said the SABC board, instead of implementing the remedial actions, they were instead justifying why they could not implement them. Mavuso was also questioned on the appointment of Hlaudi Motsoeneng as a COO and the integrity of recruitment processes around that particular appointment. Mavuso being probed on the intervention measures that the board took to address the so-called corporate purging, referring to the dismissal of certain SABC employees. Now, about 2 p.m., chairperson of the ad hoc committee, you saw him there, Mr. Vincent Smith, saying the SABC delegation, which walked out yesterday, will be afforded an opportunity to put questions to witnesses. Earlier, we also heard from former SABC Group CEO Lulama Mogobo. Mogobo says she was undermined, or she felt undermined, during her tenure at the public broadcaster. She was the second witness today to take the stand after former board member Ronnie Lubisi. Well, Mogobo, we heard saying the then acting Chief Operations Officer, Hlaudi Motsoeneng, made her leadership difficult and created camps among executives. Lubisi says he voted against the appointment of Motsoeneng as a COO at that meeting that was convened by former board chairperson Ellen Tshabalala. Well, we'll take you back to the inquiry once they reconvene at about 4 p.m. we understand. For now, let's